Hi everybody, this is Anne. I get a lot of requests to make hand-built bowls. I've done videos on hand-building bowls where I've employed the use of templates or coils. I like making those, but joining seams can add to the problems of possible cracking or curved edges wanting to flatten out as they dry. In this video, I'll demonstrate another way to make a hand-built bowl without using templates or the coil method. I started with soft clay that I wedged well. If your clay is on the stiffer side, add a little water to the clay and let it soften a bit before wedging. I like to do a spiral wedge first to make sure the clay is homogenized and the air pockets are eliminated. Then I start ram's head wedging to begin getting the clay into a cylinder shape. Finally, I roll the ram's head into a tight spiral on the table, tapping the ends to flatten them. I like to keep working the sides of the clay nice and smooth and the top and bottom nice and flat before moving on to the next step. I even rib it if need be. I'll be using an 8-inch half sphere as a mold for this, so I like my cylinder to be a bit taller than the mold and between 1.5 to 2 inches wide. I'll also be using various widths of dowel rods to stretch the clay with. Starting with the 1/4-inch dowel, I mark the center of the flat side of the cylinder, then insert the dowel end straight down into it, about halfway to the bottom. I turned over the cylinder and marked the center of the other side and repeated that step with the dowel, this time going all the way through to the opening that I already made on the other side. Now, putting a little pressure on the dowel rod ends, I began to roll the cylinder a full revolution. I'm trying to maintain even pressure so as to stretch out the clay evenly. Don't worry if one cylinder end becomes a little wider than the other side. This actually is a good thing, which you'll see in the next step. When the resulting hole was big enough, I placed the biggest dowel rod into the hole and repeated the rolling. I continued rolling until the width of the clay wall was about 3/8 of an inch. I inspected the walls on all sides and noticed one section that was a bit thick. I turned it flat to the table and rolled over that section to even it out. You'll also notice that the stretching will dry out the clay, so there will be cracks and crevices over the outer surface. My next step is to stand the cylinder up and round it. I want to re-wet the clay and smooth the surface, so I wet my red rib and rib the entire surface. To eliminate the cracks on the rim and bottom, I used wet fingers to smooth and compress the clay to strengthen it. To do the rest of the stretching, I'll use this 8-inch styrofoam half sphere. I placed a piece of plastic wrap in the mold. I then placed the smaller end of the cylinder in the mold and pushed it down a bit so the end started to turn down and inward towards itself. To further that movement, I began pouncing the bowl on the table gently. Let the gravity do some of the work. You can see that the hole in the bottom is already getting smaller. Again, I used my red rib, this time ribbing the inside of the cylinder to stretch the clay outward towards the side of the mold. I worked from the middle down towards the bottom and then the middle up to the rim until the sides of the clay filled the cavity and rounded out. I also continued pouncing the mold on the table to keep shrinking that bottom opening. I stretched the side portions of the clay to 1/4 inch in depth, but the clay along the bottom edge is harder to get to, so it's still thicker. I want to stretch that downward to start to close that gap. I began using my red rib to flatten that clay, but in the end I found that my fingers could push the clay downward more easily than the rib. You can see that opening start to shrink. The thumb is also a good tool to use to pinch and thin out the thickness of the wall. I finally got the hole covered over, but don't worry if you still have a small opening. I want to check the width of the clay both along the wall and at the bottom of the bowl to make sure it's even and sturdy. My walls look good, but the bottom is still a bit thin. My goal is to have a 1/4 inch thick wall for the entire bowl. I created this little clay pancake that I inserted into the bottom of my bowl and worked it in just to make sure that the bottom is nice and sturdy. I continued with the ribbing to compress the clay in the bottom and clean up all my finger marks. Next, I want to trim my rim. Now you can cut the bowl right at the top of the mold, but I wanted it a bit taller. Xiem created this little tool for me to do the job. He took a little rubber stamp block, drilled a hole in it, and stuck the end of the bamboo skewer in the hole. I laid the block on the edge of the mold with the bamboo stick in the rim and ran it around the rim. I took my needle tool and cleaned up the burrs. I wet my fingers and rounded the rim and rounded the top of the clay. Ideally, I would let the clay stiffen up a bit in the mold before moving on to the next step, but for demonstration purposes, I'll show you how to finish it. I want to smooth the clay on the outside of the bowl and add a foot, so I placed a bat over the opening of the bowl. I flipped over the bat and centered it on the banding wheel. I removed the mold and peeled away the plastic wrap. I wet my red rib and smoothed away the plastic wrap and stretch marks. The part of the bowl that extended above the mold still had the marks where the clay hit the mold rim. Remember that ideally your clay will be a bit stiffer than this bowl, but let's see if I can still smooth this on soft clay. I start by using the red rib to push the excess clay upward over the crease. I used my stiffer metal rib around the bottom as I turned the banding wheel to flatten the bulge. I continued these 2 steps until the clay was smooth. There are many ways to add a foot. One is to make a depression in the center of the clay, leaving an automatic flat spot for the bowl to sit upon. To do this, I found the center of the bowl and began pushing the clay slightly downward while spinning the wheel. I slowly pulled my finger outward to widen it. The red rib will curve with the depressed area to make the edge round and sharp. If I turn the bowl over, you can see that fun design element in the bottom. Another way to add a bottom is to roll out a 1/2 inch slab and rib it smooth on both sides. I used a roll of packing tape as my template for a foot. I cut along the outside of the roll and the inside. I got this nice circle. I used my thumb to bevel down the top inner edge of the circle so it'll fit tightly against the curved surface of the sphere. Remember that the bowl will have dried a bit, so let the foot dry to the same level before attaching. For demonstration purposes, I'll show you the basics now on this soft clay. Lay the foot over the bowl, center it, and mark it. Score both the top of the foot and the marked line on the bowl. Slip the foot and then attach it well, making sure to trim away any uneven areas. Now when you turn the bowl over, you'll have a nice foot. Now here's one that I made earlier with that same type of foot. I painted the imagery with underglaze when it was bone dry. You can see that I altered the rim to create fluting. If you want to see how to do this, check out the link above. Now here's another one that I made with the same type of foot, but a different altered pattern on the rim. I again painted this design with underglaze when it was bone dry. Now here's the last one. I depressed the center bottom of this one, then created an additional flat area around the center by laying it flat on the table and pouncing it gently. I altered the rim with these 4 finger depressions to match the foot. I bisque fired all of these to cone 04. To finish, I glazed around the underglazed images with my white liner glaze and Amico Sky Blue on the border. On this bowl, I brushed my white liner glaze around my design, then used 4 coats of Amico Weeping Plum on the borders. On this last bowl, I decorated it using homemade underglaze decals that I made using my own drawing and silkscreen. If you want to see how I made the silkscreen, check out the link above. I used 3 layers of Amico C11 clear glaze over the outside. I used Opulence Wildflower glaze on the rim border. Thanks to the newest members of our Little Street Pottery Research Facility team. If you'd like to join the team and earn a title, click on the Super Thanks or the Buy Me a Coffee link. In any case, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time in the studio.